Okay, we'll get started. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're not that busy, so if anybody would like to come further forward and I don't feel like I'm speaking to empty chairs, that would be great. Thank you. I love that. Straight away. Good job, guys. You're helping with my mental health. I appreciate that, you see. Makes it feel more intimate. There we go. Wonderful stuff. So I'm going to be talking to you today about workplace wellbeing and mental health. Now, I appreciate it can be quite a sensitive subject, depending on what's going on in your world at the moment. And it's one of those things that most of us have a very kind of mixed relationship with. We all have mental health. It's sometimes, though, we're a little bit kind of awkward. We don't really like talking about it. It's something there's quite a lot of what we would kind of refer to as stigma about. And my belief is that actually we need to try and remove the stigma. And in the industry that we work in, there's a huge amount of pressure. And therefore, the likelihood of stress and an impact on our mental health is really quite significant. Now, my name is Laura, and I am the founder of Stress Matters. I used to run an events agency called Sledge. So I'm from the events world, and I unfortunately experienced burnout multiple times whilst I was running the agency, or whilst I was in agency world, not necessarily running it. And back in my mid-20s, I experienced essentially a breakdown. I basically realised, the moment it kind of came to me that something wasn't right, was the fact I was writing a budget and I wrote down 5 different job titles and realised that I was going to be doing every single one of those jobs. And in that moment, I thought, this isn't okay, and I'm not okay. And up until that point, I was an ambitious girl in my mid-20s working in London in a very busy agency, and I thought my life was great. And in that moment, everything started to unravel, and I realised that I wasn't okay. Now, I managed to get some therapy, I went back to work, I went back into the events industry, and thankfully moved agencies to an agency that was a little bit more supportive around mental health and workplace wellbeing. Now, this was because, unfortunately, I'm not in my mid-20s anymore, quite a few years ago. But actually, things are only starting to really change now. And it's only been a few years, really, since actually I think there's been a shift in the way that we approach mental health and well-being as a society, but in particular in this industry. Now, I started Stress Matters back in 2017 with this idea and a big belief that you have to understand what the problem is before you try and fix it. I'm from agency world, so I used to have to understand what my client brief was before we put forward a solution. I'm sure many of you have that the same. You want to put forward a proposal that makes sense. It's going to answer the challenge. But what I saw at the time was that lots of people were talking about workplace well-being and mental health, weren't really bothering to find out what the problem was. They were just saying, look after yourselves better. And I thought, well, that doesn't really help anybody. Particularly when I was running an agency, I wanted to care about my team. I felt like I was a nice person, but I didn't really know what to do. So I needed the data. So we built Stress Matters on 3 pillars. And the concept being, you need to understand the insights, you've got to have the data, understand what the problem is. Create some accountability to make sure that change happens. Because who here has thought about improving or focusing on workplace wellbeing for the last few years and maybe not done quite as much as they hoped they would? We all have these aspirations about helping ourselves and our team, but it doesn't necessarily come into reality. And the final area is, of course, support. You've got to support your team, you've got to support yourselves, and of course, as an organisation, we wanted to try and work out how we could support people as well. So I set up Stress Matters initially to find out those insights. It didn't get set up as a business, it got set up as a piece of research, if you like. And we wanted to do some research into the events industry to find out what was going on with event professionals. Because I had my personal experience, but I wanted to know if I was alone, or if this was something that was actually across other people and across the industry as a whole. Now, many of you are probably going to be quite focused on this world of sustainability at the moment. Who here has been tasked with thinking about sustainability in your venue, in your business? Yeah, quite a few hands there. So sustainability, we so often think of sustainability in terms of the environmental impact of what we do. So we're thinking about how can we offset, how can we reduce and reuse and recycle. And we forget that sustainability includes social. For us to be completely sustainable, we need to be thinking about the impact on people. So actually, in terms of mental health and well-being, we sit right in that social part of sustainability. So when you're thinking about having conversations with your team and with your leadership teams about can we do something to help mental health and workplace well-being of the people that work here, or even the delegates or attendees of our events, remember that this is part of sustainability. So if that's your focus, this included can actually give you a whole approach to sustainability. Now, we've all had quite a lot of change going on, particularly over the last couple of years. And I think this is a really important quote. Change is the only constant in life. And when it comes to our mental health and well-being, it's that constant juggling, that constant change that can feel really overwhelming for us. Now, I've got a question for you now, so I'm not going to ask you to stand up and go to the microphone. I'm hoping you can use your big, shouty voices. And a question that we like to ask people when we start meetings. So if I want to get a bit of a sense of how everybody is, one of the first things I'll do in a meeting with my team is ask them what percentage they're on. Because sometimes I want to ask them, how are you doing, and have a proper conversation with them about it. And sometimes we don't have time. We can't always be empathetic, can't always be there to listen. So I would like to know, I need to have a little moment to think about it, if you were a battery percentage, what percentage are you at the moment? Are you 100%? Or actually, need some food and maybe dropping down to 40 odd? Whereabouts are we now? Have some people shout out? 80, amazing, right. Anybody else up in the 80s or anybody a bit lower? About 50. What else, everyone else? 70 or so, great. Okay, so we've got a bit of variety. So this is a really simple question that you can ask your teams just to check in with them if you don't want to have like an emotional, in-depth conversation with how they're doing. And sometimes I said that there isn't time and we don't really want to do that. Just checking in with your team and with yourself to ask yourself what percentage you're at gives you a little bit of an idea. Is somebody responding less than 50% every single day? Or actually, are they going up and down as you would expect anybody throughout the day with their energy? Now, this time last year, we said, we kind of established that we wanted to do something more proactive and positive for the industry. So last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, Stress Matters put on a kind of a support line, if you like. So we had a support line, we ran lots of buddies programs, did lots of support for people in the industry that needed help. And it got to the end of the year, and we'd heard so many stories from people, and so many amazing stories, and so many sad stories, of course, as well, about people in the industry. And this time last year, we really wanted to share those stories and share these stories of resilience and of people changing their career paths and changing approach. And so we put together something called a pandemic storybook. So there'll be a few people that have been on stage today and on stage the next couple of days that you might see in that pandemic storybook as well. And the idea was that we wanted to capture these stories and share them with other people in the industry to give them some kind of hope. And they're not all glossy stories. Some people were still having not a great time. And actually, if we go back to those people now, they're going to have very different stories right now. But one of the things it was really cathartic for those people that actually went through the process was to actually reflect and find out how they were doing. Because I think what can happen when we're in this constant state of change is, and particularly in our industry where we're always going, we forget to spend any time reflecting. We forget to sit there and go, wow, how far have we come? My life is so different to what it was 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. My businesses, whatever it might be. Things change, and we need to take a little bit of time just to reflect on those changes. Because they can feel like this. They can feel all messy. And sometimes, depending on how you're doing in that moment, your world can feel so blurry, so messy. There's a lot going on. But there's this idea of a change curve, okay? And I want you to have a look at this curve now and think whereabouts on this curve you think you might be, okay? So if you think about different stages that you've been through, if you think back, and this could be just literally in the last week, or it could be a couple of years ago, thinking about the different levels of emotions that you've been through. When we experience change, we don't automatically go, brilliant, that's okay, I'll crack on. Now, some things we find it easier to adapt to, and it's easier for us to change, and that process will be really fast. but it doesn't happen all the time. And some of us go through this experience of shock and depression before we're ready to start thinking about what the future is. And so I want you to think of this curve and think, where do you think you are? Maybe think back over the last couple of years, or even, let's say, the last week, with things changing quite dramatically in the last week. How are you doing at the moment? And if I were to ask you how your team were doing, do you know how your team are? Do you know how the people that you work with are? So not necessarily just the team members that might report into you. What about your clients? What about your suppliers, your partners, your stakeholders? How are they all doing at the moment? Do you know? Do you find that actually you have quite shallow conversations with them that are very transactional? Or do you get to know them a little bit more and know how they're actually doing? We did some research, so we do a lot of research at Stress Matters, because I think it's really important to actually base our support services on facts and information. We know that unfortunately 13% of people in the industry had to take time off work due to their mental ill health in the last year. This research was done about 6 months ago now, so within the 12 months prior to that. That's a big chunk of people. Now, this might not be weeks and weeks, this might be a couple of days, but people take time off work when they're ill. And unfortunately, sometimes they actually don't. Sometimes they don't take time off work. And I don't know if you've ever felt tired at work. I'm imagining if you work in events, you've probably had the odd day you feel tired. And we make mistakes when we're tired. Things go off to print that aren't quite right. We might miss a train, we might miss a flight. Things don't quite work as they're supposed to do when we're feeling unwell. Those of you in the industry that use freelancers, probably most of us, huge proportion of freelancers have wanted to leave the industry over the last year. And a lot have. And I don't know about you guys, but the people that we work with a lot are really struggling at the moment in terms of talent, whether or not that's freelancers or full-time, part-time staff. Talent attraction at the moment is really hard because people needed to find alternative jobs in the last year or two. And actually, we're really struggling getting them back because they're now in this situation where they're probably earning money somewhere else in what's quite possibly a less stressful environment. So we've got to be able to attract them back into the industry and not attract them back into the same thing. Actually, we need to improve ourselves as an industry. And this isn't just in the events industry. Depression has doubled in adults since the start of the pandemic. That is huge numbers, okay? Depression is a mental health illness. Now, you can recover from depression, but it's still an illness. And as businesses, and particularly in an industry that we're so prone to stress, we need to be really conscious about the fact that ourselves, but also those people that we work with, are possibly not in a well place at the moment, or haven't been in a well place for a while. So think about how you as a team member, how your business is supporting people that are unwell. Now, one of the stats that came out that initially I thought this was really lovely, actually great. 53% of people that responded to the surveys believed that their businesses had taken a more proactive approach to their mental health and well-being. And for me, proactive is really important because who here has an employee assistance program in your business? So who here has a number that you can call and speak to a counsellor or a therapist, some kind of service in the business? Yeah, so about half of you. That's what we'd refer to as a reactive program. But actually, we want people to be proactive. So first of all, I thought this is great, because over half the amount of people here, they're in businesses that are being proactive. And then I flipped that, because you can always read statistics the other way, and said, well, hang on a minute, that means nearly 50% of the companies are not being more proactive when it comes to mental health and well-being in a pandemic. So actually, if we're not encouraging our businesses to be more proactive now, why not? What's happening to these businesses that mean that their biggest asset in terms of their people are not being supported when things are really tough for everyone? Now, it costs, this is information from Deloitte, and if anybody's interested in the references, let me know and I can give you some. It costs on average per employee per year about €2,000 for mental ill health. Now, that's not if somebody's unwell, it costs you as a business that. This is on average across everybody. So I want you to do a bit of maths now. I want you to work out how many people are in your team or in your business and work out how much money that's costing you per year in poor mental health. And the thing is, there isn't like a line on your budget that says poor mental health, 200,000 euros. It doesn't say that. It's spread across lots of different parts of your budget, but it's a big cost to businesses. So if you want to try and improve the mental health and well-being of your team, and you get stuck with, we don't have any money, we've got budgets are tight, we can't afford that, actually you've got to look at it the other way and say, we can't afford not to, because it's already costing our business money. And actually we can reduce that cost down if we proactively support people. So I mentioned there were 3 different areas. So I wanted to give you some thoughts here about different things you can think about when it comes to the mental health and well-being of your teams. Okay, so first of all, in terms of insights, thinking about actually what do you track? Now, I appreciate most of you probably don't work in HR, but I imagine most of you probably have some kind of people responsibility, whether or not that's line managers, direct reports into you, or stakeholders that you're working with, maybe a team for an event that you're putting on. We're to track absences. We don't often track absences thoroughly. We just say that person's off sick, and we don't think any more of it. 55% of working days lost are down to ill mental health, which means that over half of the time that people are off sick leave, it's because of their mental health. Now, they might not tell you that. They might not phone up and say, hi, I can't come into work today, I've got poor mental health. And that's largely because of stigma. So one reason is that people don't feel that they can phone up and say, I've got poor mental health, I can't come into the workplace today. And hopefully you can have a culture in an organisation where people could feel that they could say that. But also on the other side, quite often people don't know that the physical illness they're experiencing is actually down to mental ill health. Because our mental health and our physical health are completely connected. So if you have a headache, or you have stomach aches, or you might even have kind of a neck ache, something like that, really regularly it comes down to stress. Anybody experience that? Get headaches? Yeah. You get headaches or even migraines. These physical impacts actually are really regularly down to our physical health. So when somebody phones up and says, oh, I've got a migraine, it's not necessarily that they've got a mental ill health situation that it's connected to, but it may well be down to their mental health. So think about actually how often you check in with your team. Are you checking in with them regularly? Are you assuming that your team are okay because you're okay and they look okay? But actually, of course, when it's our mental health, even though there's some physical shows of it, actually quite a lot of it we can pretend. As I said, when I experienced burnout, actually, I didn't even realize that I was experiencing it. And now I look back, the people around me could have seen it. If I think back now, there were signs and symptoms that I demonstrated, that now I know a little bit more about it. Had they known, they could have checked in with me. Now, I'm not blaming them because they didn't know, but that's one of the missions of Stress Matters, is that people can see those signs and symptoms and we know what to look out for people. Think about, actually, do you know what that cost is of poor mental health? So I gave you that €2,000 cost, but you can actually work it out much closer to what it is for your business. So there's lots of things that might determine what that is. So it might be things like the age of the team. It might be the salaries that the team is on. It might be the kind of work that they're doing. You can work out a tighter cost for poor mental health. So thinking, actually, do you know what that cost is? And can you explain that to your business so you can really understand those insights? And training your line managers. So anybody here done any mental health training before? One person, 2 people in the whole audience, okay? So I'm very pleased you guys have. It's something we need to learn. You know how at school we learn first aid, basic first aid? Who is a physical first aider, in fact? Okay, so we've got at least 6 of you. So we've got triple the number of people who know physical first aid compared to mental health first aid, okay? Now, one of the things I think we can do with our line managers is train our line managers to spot the signs and symptoms of poor mental health. It doesn't have to be an intense course, it can be a day, but giving your line managers the skills to spot the signs and symptoms of mental ill health means that hopefully we can support people before it becomes a mental health illness. We called the business Stress Matters for a very specific reason. In this industry, we are very comfortable with the idea of stress. We've decided as an industry, well, it's just inevitable. You get stressed in this industry, you just have to suck it up. You have to just put up with the fact that there's stress in this industry. And I don't think that's true. We have pressure in this industry, a huge amount of pressure. We are deadline driven, but it doesn't mean we need to experience stress. There's something called a stress curve. And what it shows you is those people, those of you that may well be sitting here now saying, actually, I quite like stress. I thrive under the stress of events. And don't get me wrong, I love that adrenaline and that pressure and the deadlines that come with events. It's one of the reasons a lot of people work in this industry. It's the excitement and the adrenaline that we love when the show opens, when the event starts, whatever it might be. But actually, that's when we're in this left-hand side, optimum side of stress. But there's a tipping point, and we all have a tipping point, okay? So I need to just take a moment now and look at this graph and think, whereabouts are you on this graph right now? Would you know where you are? Are you in that place where actually you've not got a lot of work on? There's no pressure, therefore you're not really performing. I can't imagine in this industry anyone's doing that, but you might be. You might be in this green area. And then hopefully most of you are in optimum pressure, that actually you're in a good place and you feel like you're performing well and you've got that adrenaline and you've got that push, but it's not too much, you can manage it. But unfortunately, I think the likelihood is there is going to be quite a number of you that are in the orange and the red section, where actually things are feeling really overwhelming at the moment, and you may be at close to burnout. So I want you to think about yourself, but also think about your team and those people you work with again. Would you know where they are on this curve? Do you know how the people that you work with? Or even on a basic level, if you've got a partner, do you know how your partner is? So think about accountability, that second pillar, okay? Do you have a strategy for your workplace well-being? One of the things that I find a lot with businesses is that we tend to approach our workplace well-being in a very tactical way. We just do things. We think there are certain activities that if we do that, that will help. We might offer people fruit or more water or some yoga classes, all of which can be good, but they don't make for a strategy. You wouldn't have a business without a sales strategy or a marketing strategy or a business strategy. Your mental health and well-being of your team needs to be approached strategically too. So think about having a strategy. Many of your businesses might be accredited by things like ISO 45001. So there's lots of global standards that businesses will align to. So 45001 is around a health and safety standard. So even if you're not aware of it, the likelihood is your business is probably ISO 45001 certified. I think it was in June this year, 45003 got launched. And that was the global standard for psychological safety. So essentially mental safety in the workplace. So I am obviously very happy about this because there now is a standard that we can achieve, and we can actually say to other businesses, we look after our team, look, we've achieved this standard. So if your business is 45001 accredited, think about actually, can you go that little bit step further to become 45003 accredited, to really understand where that health and safety steps from being physical into mental safety. Very basic, put it on your risk assessments for your events. Create accountability. Who has mental health or well-being on their event risk assessments? Nobody. Not one person. Pop it on your risk assessment. It means you have to think about it. It means you've got to acknowledge and then hopefully mitigate the risks. If it's not on your risk assessment, you're not going to do anything about it. So think about if you're putting on an event, you might not be the person writing the risk assessment, but make sure you check it's on their risk assessment. If it's on the risk assessment, it can be approached, it can be managed, it can be mitigated. You have to think about it if it's on your risk assessment. Think about actually what the attitude towards mental health and well-being is in your business. Do you have a business where people would quite happily talk about their mental health and well-being? Or are you probably in the majority, which is people feel slightly uncomfortable still talking about mental health and well-being? I don't really like it. It makes me feel a bit awkward. I wouldn't talk to anyone at work about it. And I hear that a lot, and I understand that entirely. But as a society, we're starting to change around mental health and well-being. We're starting to have better conversations with people about how they're doing. I'm a positive thinker, and I think one of the things that is good that has come out of the pandemic is the fact that our mental health is being talked about more. We're much more likely to talk about our mental health now than we were a couple of years ago. I mean, it's a bad reason that it's come about, but actually the good thing being is we're more comfortable talking about it. So think about actually what the kind of a cultural approach to your mental health and well-being is. And build an internal support network. So one of the easiest things you can do to build workplace well-being programs is to have a team of champions. We call them well-being champions, but you call them a culture club, you could call them whatever you like. The idea of having a little team of people that actually are there to support everybody's mental health and well-being, because it's very easy to assume it's the HR's responsibility, human resources responsibility, but it isn't. It's all of our responsibility. And if you're thinking about you as a person organising an event and how you can think about your team at the event or your attendees at the event as well, do you have a network of people that they could reach out to? I mentioned before about mental health first aiders. Do you have anybody that's trained at your event that could support somebody if they're experiencing mental health distress? Now, in January, we are launching a wellbeing manager program. So for those of you that would like to support the team but don't have the capacity to do it, because it does take a lot of time to manage the people's wellbeing, we're launching a subscription model, so a pay per person per month approach to wellbeing. So we will essentially take over and look after your team for you. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Now, in terms of support, that final pillar that I mentioned, assess what you're currently doing. As I said, the likelihood is your business might be doing something when it comes to mental health and well-being, but are you measuring whether or not it's successful or not? Are you measuring the impact of it? Again, if we think about this in the context of sustainability, a lot of things we talk about in sustainability are measuring the impact, calculating the impact. We have to do it in mental health and well-being as well. In which case, we have to know where we're starting. We have to know the data and gather those insights through surveys, through research, to find out how people are now, to be able to assess the ROI of being able to do that. And think holistically. I mentioned before that physical and mental health are very much combined. But actually, there's also other areas of well-being. So we refer to emotional and spiritual well-being as well. There are multiple pillars of well-being that if you're going to put together a well-being strategy, you need to consider all of these different elements, not just mental health or physical health. Actually, it's more holistic than that. So I mentioned before about mental health first aiders. These are people that can spot the signs and symptoms of poor mental health. So where you've got a physical first aider and their job is to support in the first instance if somebody needs any help, they've hurt themselves, if they've cut themselves, they've been in an accident, you're not there, you don't get trained as a physical first aider to become a surgeon or to become a GP, a general practitioner, a doctor. You get told how to do the support in the first instance. It's first aid. And it's exactly the same for mental health. Mental health first aid. You don't learn how to become a therapist. You don't learn how to diagnose someone's mental health. But what you do learn are the first steps to be able to support somebody if you see any signs and symptoms of poor mental health, or if they come to you and say, I don't feel okay, can somebody help me? So it's a really empowering course to go on to understand a little bit more about your mental health. Now, depending on where you guys are based, there are mental health first aid kind of franchise, if you like, across the world. So mental health first aid as a program was set up in Australia. And it's now kind of come right the way around the world. So Mental Health First Aid England, who we are accredited by, depending on the region that you are based in, you are likely to find a mental health first aid, whatever country you're from, okay? So have a look online. The likelihood is you'll find one in your local area. If you don't, let me know and I can find out what the kind of the closest equivalent would be for you. But it's a very useful skill to have in life, but also in the workplace as well, okay? And it's an accredited course, so you get a certificate and everything to show that you understand mental health first aid. And there's also online courses that you can do. So if you want to try and upskill the team, thinking about designing and delivering a mentally safe event. So I mentioned before, a lot of what I've just been talking about is around your team and the workplace well-being. But actually, we as event organisers, I think, have a responsibility to design and deliver mentally safe events. We wouldn't be comfortable putting on an event where we know somebody was going to get physically hurt. You're all wearing face masks, okay? You're taking precautions for your physical health. We should be doing that for our mental health of our attendees as well. So think about what you put in place as an event organizer, or as a venue, or a DMC, or whatever it might be in your capacity. How are you considering the mental safety of the people that come to your events? Now, you might have a lot more access to be able to support them in terms of actually designing certain things. One of the things we might refer to is something called a reset room. So if you have an event, and hopefully you've got an extra little room you can have somewhere, where if somebody's feeling uncomfortable or feeling anxious, maybe they've had a terrible journey, and they're really tired and they're missing home, whatever it might be, there's somewhere that they can go and reset. Somewhere they can take a moment and just collect their thoughts. Because actually for some people traveling, particularly at the moment, it can be quite stressful. It can encourage anxiety in people. And we all experience anxiety. We have anxiety every day, but actually some of us will experience a heightened level of anxiety if we're in new situations and different places. And events can quite often be that. And I think sometimes as event organisers, because we love this industry, we can't imagine that other people wouldn't want to come to an event. Like, well, I love events. I want to get back to events. Why would nobody else want to? And actually, sometimes it's and it might be for you anyway, a really big step to go back into a public place and to go on transport to get to that public place. So think about actually how you can design and deliver a mentally safe event. And then, as I said, actually managing the team is really important as well. So thinking about the mental safety of your team and of your extended crew. So if you've got freelancers, you've got agencies that you're bringing in team members, how are you supporting them? Or do you know that the person or the company you're subcontracting to, are they supporting that crew? We can't just assume because we subcontracted out to somebody else that they are looking after the mental safety of that team. So your hostesses, your security guards, your catering. Again, check it in the risk assessments. Make it part of your purchasing program that actually you consider, have they considered the mental safety of the team? So there's a quote here by Henry Ford, which I think is a very, very true quote. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you are right. Okay? One of the things I find quite often when people think about their mental health and well-being is, well, our business, we just don't really care about it, or I try and care about it, but person at the top doesn't believe in it, doesn't believe it's a thing, for example, doesn't believe that we can be mentally unwell, thinks it's a sign of weakness, all of these different things, okay? But I'm a big believer that we can be the change. It's got to start from somewhere. And I think when we sit there and think, well, nobody else in the business cares about it, or nobody in the industry that I can see cares about it, we just have to carry on as is. Stress is not an inevitable part of the events industry. It has just become that way. We can have an industry that is not stressful if we culturally change, but that change requires each person to take change, to make change, to do little things to have a butterfly effect on the whole industry. So think about actually the change you can have on your business, on your event, Maybe it's just that one event that you organise a year. Maybe it's only got 50 people at it. But if you can make an event that's more mentally safe, that's a positive thing to have done. And hopefully, if a number of you start to do that as an industry, we will lose less team members to burnout. As I said, the talent that has been in the industry has started to move away from this industry. And one of the reasons, okay, there's job security and money, of course, but it's because that they've found job security and money in other industries that are less stressful. So we need to create an environment, again, a culture where it's not as stressful. As I said, we get all the fun of the deadlines, the adrenaline, but the non-stress. There are too many people in this industry that have experienced burnout. And there are too many people in this industry that have become addicted to things like alcohol and drugs because of this industry and the pressure that they experience in it. And I think we need to change. I think if we haven't changed already, this is the time to change. Wrap it up in sustainability. Wrap it up into diversity and inclusion. If you can think about it just on its own, even better. But if you have to get it through to the team, there are different ways to talk about it because it's all about people. It's all about understanding that if we support people to be the best version of themselves at the workplace, they will be the best person they can be in that role, and therefore it'll be more positive for our business. We have different levels of resilience and the different ways we deal with change and everything that's happened. And I hope that a lot of you are resilient people that are coping well and are on that left-hand side of the stress curve. But resilience can be an elusive thing. We might have it sometimes and we might not have it other times. But resilience is made up of different areas. So think about, by looking at this slide, which is what I would refer to as your resilience superpower. Are you the kind of person that's really optimistic? Are you very solutions focused? Actually, you don't experience stress because you're very good at dealing and managing it. That's great. That's a resilience tool. So what is your resilience superpower? There will be one of these. Even if it doesn't feel like you're particularly resilient at the moment, there'll be one of these things that normally is the thing that makes you deal with change well. And when things happen and they do feel overwhelming, they do feel stressful, there's a resilience tool that I want to share with you, which is called the 4 A's. So essentially in pretty much all situations, you can take one of these 4 A's to try and tackle it, to improve your control of the situation, okay? So can you adapt? Can you alter? Can you avoid? Or can you accept what has happened? Now, actually, quite often people think avoiding is a bad strategy. We shouldn't avoid a problem. And I agree, most of the time, we shouldn't avoid situations. But sometimes, depending on how we're feeling in that moment and our mental health, actually we might need to avoid it for a day or 2 days or even 10 minutes because it's better for us to take a moment and then tackle it another time. So think about which of these 4 A's might be suitable for you when situations are negative for you at work or at home as well. And the big one is accept. In our industry, a lot of us like control. So you hear the words control freak, if you've heard that phrase before. So the idea that actually we like being in control. We don't like it when things go wrong. We feel out of control. And when we're feeling overwhelmed, a lot of that is us feeling out of control. And there's this powerful idea of a control circle. And the idea being that there's a little center circle that says control, one outside of that says influence, and a wider one that says accept. And actually, we spend so much time worrying about things that are in our accept circle. We have to accept certain things. We cannot change them. As much as event professionals are pretty good at making things happen, whatever they might be, there are certain things we just have to accept, okay? But we spend too much time worrying about those things. So the less time we can spend worrying about things that we have to accept, the more time and the more headspace we've got to think about the things that we can influence and we can control. And we can control how we think and feel about a situation. So if we're getting angry or we're frustrated or we're sad about something, many times, and this is not the case for a mental health illness, but many times we are choosing to be angry. We are choosing to be frustrated. We are choosing to be sad. So by the nature of that means we can choose to be happy. We can choose to accept it. We can choose to be in control. So a lot of that is actually we can decide how we feel about something. Okay, little quick exercise for you now. I would like you to look around the room and I want you to identify 5 things that you haven't seen before. So hopefully me and the screen are not included. Look around the room and I want you to see 5 things that you think are interesting or just maybe very small that you hadn't noticed. Okay, so just have a look. 5 things. I appreciate we're in a bit of a box. There's only so much we can see in here. Okay. Now, this is going to be a very tough one because they've got some very good soundproofing in here. But 4 things that you can hear. So 4 different sounds. Okay. 3 things that you can smell. Can you identify 3 different smells? Appreciate also with face masks on, there's probably a very uncomfortable level of smell here. 3 things you can smell. Okay, now this is where we don't touch other people, because that's not okay apparently in COVID times. I want you to touch 2 different textures. Okay, touch 2 different things that might feel a bit different. Okay, and then the final thing is I want you to do 1 deep breath. So the deepest, biggest breath you can in, and then slowly breathe out. Okay, so a silly little exercise that can work very well in the moment, that can take less than a minute to center yourself, and what we kind of refer to as mindfulness. Being in the moment, trying to understand what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, what you can touch, and think on your breathing. So if the world of mindfulness seems a little bit strange and big to you, it's a really simple exercise that actually makes it very easy for you just to refocus in the moment. So as I said before, there are 3 different pillars I want you to try and think about your workplace wellbeing and mental health across: insights, accountability, and support. And it might be you're great at the support, but is it based on the insights that you have? Do you have insights or not? Is there accountability in the team? Or actually, are you very good at saying you care about your team, but not doing anything? It always gets pushed back that little bit further. So think about that accountability. As I said, we offer various services in terms of Stress Matters, so if anybody wants to have a chat about the kind of things that we can help when it comes to insights, accountability, and support, then let me know. But these are all things you can do yourself. Okay, probably not an accredited course, but generally you can do these things yourself. Workplace wellbeing and mental health is not a complicated thing. It's a daunting thing when you don't know anything about it. But actually, it comes down to the fundamentals of looking after your team. It's just that sometimes our version of looking after our team works for us personally, just doesn't necessarily work for the whole team. And there is data, again, I love a bit of data, as I said. There is data to prove that if we focus on increasing the well-being of our team, and we can measure that, increase the well-being of our team, it does increase productivity. We're more efficient. Think about those times when you are just on it. You are so good at your job. And the likelihood is you're doing that when you feel well. You're not likely to be doing that when you don't feel well. If you're more productive, you're going to be more profitable, and it's better for business. Okay? So think about actually the impact that you can have personally and on your team or your business when it comes to the well-being and mental health of your team. And I mentioned before this idea of once upon a pandemic. Think about the story that you have experienced over the last 6 months, 18 months, 2 years. You can think back as far as you like. Do it a bit like This Is Your Life for anybody that remembers that. Think about what your story has been. There's going to be twists and turns, there's going to be ups and downs in it. Think about your story And remember that you get to decide what the next part of your story is. So when it comes to your mental health and well-being, you can have a positive impact on your mental health and well-being. And you can have a positive impact on your team's mental health and well-being. And it starts with just making little changes and talking about it in the business, asking the very simple but powerful question, how are you doing today, can have a huge impact. And the final message I want to leave with you is that you've got this. It is a stressful industry, but it doesn't have to be. It's a high-pressure industry, and we get to remove the stress if we focus on it. So thank you very much, everybody. If anybody's got any questions, you are very welcome to ask, either kind of publicly on the microphone, or if you want to come up and chat, because I appreciate mental health and wellbeing sometimes you don't always want to talk about on a microphone. So if anybody's got any questions they want to ask one-on-one, then feel free to grab me. Otherwise, please do ask any other questions. See the stigma. People don't like asking questions about mental health and well-being. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody. Please do reach out if you do have any questions. I'll hang around for a little bit if anyone who wants to ask one-on-one as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.